Joining us now to discuss the historic joint strikes between the U.S. and Israel on Iran is Gerard Filitti, a Middle East affairs analyst and attorney specializing in international law. Gerard, it's great to have you with us.
Pleasure, thank you.
We have been discussing all things Israel, Iran, the United States, intensely ever since October 7th, 2023. Now things seem to be coalescing in these strikes. So what is your overall view of the situation?
They're coalescing in these strikes that were very well planned and well contemplated. This was not some impulsive decision by President Trump to attack Iran. This is the calculated outcome of months of planning, seeing that the Iranian regime was committed to maintaining its ballistic missiles, continue producing or trying to produce nuclear weapons, and export its regime of terror across the world. So we are seeing a very calculated move to decapitate the Iranian government, giving the people a chance to rise up, as Donald Trump has said on multiple occasions, and take their country back.
And a lot of things are happening all at once ever since yesterday morning. So in your view, how successful is this attack so far? It's just in the beginning stages.
Well, so far, I think, judged on the success that we've been able to eliminate high-value targets in Iran, decapitate their government, take out a lot of their facilities, including their ability to have an air defense system, where American and Israeli planes are flying over the country unchallenged right now. So that's a huge success. What happens next remains to be seen. Iran is still firing missiles at the U.S. and Israel. It's still looking to put up a fight. So the next days will be very determinative of the outcome.
Okay, and talk to us about Iran's strikes on its neighbors in the Gulf, the Arab states, something that was kind of surprising. Were you surprised by that?
Yes and no. We have to remember that the U.S. has military presence in some of these countries. We have a major air base. We have the Fifth Fleet is in Bahrain. So it's not unexpected for Iran to target American facilities. But what we have seen is indiscriminate targeting of civilian areas by Iran. So that looks like an attempt to expand the war and make it a more regional conflict.
Okay, and Gerard, I wanted to just come back to this post on Truth Social by President Donald Trump that we missed at the beginning. He says recently, I have just been informed that we have destroyed and sunk 9 Iranian naval ships, some of them relatively large and important. He's saying we are going after the rest. They will soon be floating at the bottom of the sea. Also, in a different attack, we largely destroyed their naval headquarters. Other than that, their Navy is doing very well. A little bit of humor in the middle of this is from President Donald Trump there. But what's your assessment of the U.S. attacks on the Iranian Navy?
It's as expected. We need to take out their ability to make war against the United States. We have an aircraft carrier group in the Gulf. We want to make sure that that's protected. So taking out their surface vessels and their ability to attack American shipping is crucial. But it also goes to show that this is a long-term strategy. We don't want Iran to close the Gulf of Hormuz, the Straits of Hormuz. We don't want them to choke oil exports to the rest of the world. So this is very much a preemptive measure to make sure that oil can continue to flow.
So talk about the importance of keeping the Straits of Hormuz open.
Well, a lot of the oil that is exported from the Gulf passes through there, and it's a very narrow area that Iran can control through laying mines or using those ships that are now at the bottom of the Gulf. And with the absence of those threats to shipping, you can have unrestricted oil passing through, which really is what we want to see. We don't want to see pressure on the economy, either in the U.S., Europe, or any of our allies, because of oil issues.
And there's a lot to get to, but just staying a little bit with the Strait of Hormuz, we did see a joint naval exercise between Iran, China, and Russia there. What is that signal, or is that, yeah?
Well, look, Iran is trying to learn and benefit from advanced weaponry that that Russia and China have. It doesn't seem to have managed to do that because their ships are at the bottom of the sea. So this was a training exercise to send a message that there is some sort of a joint unity between these countries, but that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing Iran on its own, the rest of the world turning its back to it. Other than some angry rhetoric, we're not seeing anyone actually come out and support Iran.
And of course, so many people think, the U.S. is attacking Iran, it's World War III. That could be a thought, right, of critics.
No, it could be a thought, but we have to look. We saw this before last year. We had the same fear last year, and it did not escalate into World War III. Our European allies are in many ways supportive. We have seen language that they understand that this is for the good of the world. Russia has made noise. China has made noise. But at the end of the day, they understand that Iran is a pariah state that's a danger to everyone. So we're not seeing anyone rushing to defend it. Where they throw missiles at, they even tried throwing missiles at Cyprus, so Europe today, and that went nowhere. We're not seeing World War III. Those are exaggerations that don't have any merit, really.
And staying with the criticism of these attacks, U.S. lawmakers calling for a vote on war powers, is this necessary?
It is necessary, but it's also something we've seen in every presidential administration that's deployed the U.S. armed forces overseas. It doesn't matter whether it's been a Democrat or a Republican in the White House, Congress wants to control the declaration of war. So we will see a war powers resolution measure take form this week. Whether it goes anywhere, I doubt it will. Look, even if Congress votes down this endeavor, the president will override it. He will veto it. So at the end of the day, this is a lot of political noise, but legally, President Trump is in this, has a strong basis for what he's doing.
And he's in the steering seat with this.
Yes.
Okay. And, what if this strike goes on longer than expected? I mean, President Trump in the beginning is saying it's a matter of days or weeks, but is there a possibility of this thing extending longer than anyone really wants it to?
It depends on what the actual end goal is, and the only person that knows that right now is Donald Trump. If the goal is to make sure that Iran is incapable of threatening the West, the United States, Israel, or our Gulf allies, then this will end when enough of the regime is decapitated and it has no more missiles left to fire at anyone. That could be a matter of days or weeks because we know where these sites are. Every time Iran fires a missile, we identify where it came from and we can blow that site up. So that's the short part of it. Longer term, it depends on whether the people rise up, whether there will be regime change in the area, and whether we will maintain aerial presence to at least support what's going on the ground.
So let's get into that regime change, because that really seems to be the big question here.
Well, that's the big question, and that would be mission accomplished. We've had too many instances of cutting deals that have ended up backfiring on the U.S. and the West. This is a regime that cannot be trusted. So in order to not be here next year doing it again, we want to have a different set of government in Iran. We want to have people that want their people to be free, that want to enjoy prosperity and peace. And so long as we see the current regime, that's not happening. So yes, I think ultimately the goal needs to be regime change, because that's the only way you have long-term peace and stability in the Middle East.
And explain that for us. I mean, for the people who don't necessarily support these strikes and saying that they're unprovoked, Zohran Mamdani, mayor of New York City, why do you think it's necessary?
Let's look back just in the last 25 years since September 11, 2001. Iran has been responsible for over 5,000 Americans injured, service members injured, almost 1,000 killed. The United States has spent over $3 trillion of our economy on maintaining our armed forces because of Iran. Iran wants to build a nuclear weapon. Iran has shown aggression towards its neighbors. Iran uses terrorist proxies across the world. Iran has tried to assassinate Americans, has tried to assassinate President Trump. This is not a good thing. This is a rogue state that's been a danger to the United States for decades. Finally, we're in a position of doing something about it, not just talking and trying to cut a deal. So I think people need to remember this is an existential danger to the United States. People are worried about sleeper cells, and they should be, because this is what Iran does. Iran gets terrorists, and embeds them in Western society. So this is a threat that we're finally dealing with, and people who are saying that there should not be regime change, I think they're out of their minds, quite frankly.
And we are hearing quite a bit of that. There's protesters in New York City that came out, very soon after the announcement of these strikes in Iran, saying hands off Iran. This is funded by the People's Forum, which is funded in turn by a Beijing-based billionaire. Talk about this.
Anti-democratic, anti-U.S., anti-West. This is what these people are. Not once did they express concern about the human rights atrocities being committed by the Iranian regime. When you see people being burned to death, gang rapes of women just for protesting or, God forbid, uncovering their hair, this is what they're supporting. They're not condemning this. They want this regime to continue in power. So what we're seeing is a very anti-American focus, money pouring in, dark money coming in to incite Americans in a direction that we don't want. We want democracy. We want peace and prosperity in the world. We don't want what the Iranian regime is doing. And the people out there protesting for the regime, that's just insane.
And we know, of course, that big money in China has to have some kind of contact with the Chinese Communist Party. It's a totalitarian regime. They have operatives in every organization, every level of society, basically controlling everything that goes on of significance. So what do you think interest the Chinese have in stopping these strikes in Iran?
Well, I think China wants to be sure that it continues to get black market oil. They need that for their economy. Without the oil, the economy grounds to a halt. Let's not forget, during the pandemic, we saw that the world can make do without communist Chinese goods. The world can find other producers in the area for almost as cheap without giving money to a communist oppressive regime. So China needs that oil. China also needs to sell its weapons because it has a balance of payments problem. It has a domestic inflation that's not being recognized because all the books are cooked. So China needs to sell to Iran, and it needs their oil, so they want this to end as quickly as possible.
What would the situation look like for China if the Iranian puzzle piece wasn't in play?
Well, I think for China, things would go on as before, but there's still pressure. There has been pressure ever since Donald Trump took office. There's been more and more pressure on communist China. So I think if it weren't for Iran, if this were continuing unabated, you would see China trying to invest more in the Middle East, more in Africa. You see their attempts of, that's what they've been doing for many years now. And I think without putting a stop to it in Iran, they would just have more opportunities, and in Venezuela for that matter. Let's not forget Chinese investment in South America. They infiltrated that market for decades, and they're pushing hard to buy governments, buy people, buy the economy. So both in Venezuela and Iran, we're putting a stop to communist Chinese ambitions.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite the moment in world history. I mean, kind of broadening out here. There isn't a lot of huge breaking news to chew on up to the minute here, but we're seeing the regime in Venezuela being toppled. It looks like Iran is next, even if their regime stays in place in some way, shape, or form. They are significantly diminished, forced. It's like the table is turning in a dramatic way.
Well, I think the table is turning because we have a different type of leadership in the U.S. right now. The traditional diplomatic path has been talk, let's cut a deal even if it's bad. We want to avoid actually showing strength. We want to avoid war and conflict. But that hasn't gotten us anywhere. That's gotten us in a position where we are beholden in the United States to the Chinese Communist government, where we are threatened by Iran and have to deal with aggression around the world without doing anything about it other than trying to cut a deal. So finally, we have someone who flipped that script. When we have a regime in Venezuela, a narco-terrorist regime that's killing Americans, we're not just going to negotiate with them, we're going to take that out. And that is something that we need to be mindful of for the next 3 years, or what's left of Donald Trump's term, is that we will not be playing business as usual. It's not diplomacy as usual. America is back in a much more powerful way than before.
And just looking out at the long term here, because the Islamic regime is not just a 4-year term like we have in the United States. This is a religious fundamentalist group with long-term ambitions that, in one sense, transcend ordinary things. They're not looking to get money or mansions, perhaps like a drug lord would be. So their lifespan could extend, in theory, far beyond any decimation of their regime and bubble up in some other way.
Well, in many ways, yes, but it's ironic. I was laughing as you were saying that because if you look at the family members of the current regime, they're off, even their daughters, not wearing head coverings. They're off enjoying a millionaire lifestyle in the Gulf and in Europe. So it's very much hypocrisy by the ruling class that wants to impose a strict Sharia law on its people without living up to those same standards. But that shows you what a totalitarian government is. The Islamist extremists in that country are a minority. They always have been. The vast majority of the people are not that extreme. They may be religious, but they're not extremists. So I think most people are not comfortable with the way the Iranian government has been repressing and oppressing people for years now, and they're looking to change.
All right, Gerard, we have a lot more to talk about in the next half of the show. Reza Pahlavi, the crown prince of Iran, is, like it or not, the person who everyone's talking about taking over in at least an interim phase of this regime to whatever comes next. But does he have the skills to do it?
Well, for the transition period, he absolutely does. He is someone who 10 years ago, the Pahlavi family was seen as a fond memory of better times in Iran. He was not taken as seriously as a potential leader or a revolutionary figure. But in the last 10 years, he has done a very good job mobilizing, building a base of support within Iran itself, having the ability to reach out and have contacts within people who don't support the regime, to the point that he's developed networks in the country. So that shows that he has that seriousness necessary to take the next step and be at least a transitional leader. And he does have the support of the West. He does the support of many Iranians, at least in the diaspora overseas from Iran. So there is a potential there for him to be a transition leader.
And before going on, let's drill in a little bit into the details of something you just said about these networks in Iran. What are these networks? Who's a part of them? What kind of leverage do they have?
Well, there have always been dissidents in Iran. Some have been more vocal than others. A lot of people, 81%, they don't support the regime. So these networks, whether it's started by social media or by back-channel discussions on chat or through other electronic devices, there is a healthy dialogue going on between people in Iran who don't support the regime, including officers in the IRGC, in the military, people in government positions, although not the key government positions. And they have been in communication with whether it's a Pahlavi or whether it's other figures in the West, with the Iranian diaspora. So that communication network exists of people who are dissatisfied with the regime and might be a good source for mobilizing against it.
Okay, and people in the regime, are there enough people dissatisfied to actually make the difference, seeking that amnesty that Trump has made, taking them up on?
Look, I think that in the regime, we've seen a pyramid structure where the top gets richer and it takes more exploitative control over the others. So within government ministries, you have plenty of people who are not living the life of luxury that their higher-ups have been living and who are dissatisfied with the actions that they're told to take, to repress, to oppress, to kill, to carry out economic policies or terrorist policies. So I think that there is that level of dissatisfaction within Iran, within the regime, that they can't even take up arms or facilitate arms transfers to people who do want to fight for their freedom.
Now, do you think we could be looking at some sort of Venezuela-type situation where all that's left of the Iranian regime is a more compliant base like Delcy Rodriguez, for example?
Well, it's certainly possible, and again, that whether or not that's what happens, only President Trump knows what his end game is. That is a possibility. But I think that what we have seen in the last few weeks and leading up to this military action is there is a red line. Iran cannot develop nuclear weapons. Iran cannot continue with ballistic missiles. Iran needs to stop exporting terrorism. So even if it is some regime figure that's still in power after this is all said and done, there are certain terms that are non-negotiable. So there will be a different Iran, whoever's in charge.
Okay, now we're seeing people in the streets in Iran celebrating this. The protests, we know that at least 30,000, probably more, were killed by the Iranian regime in recent weeks and months. They're not getting mowed down now. So what comes next with that?
Well, I think this is what President Trump has been talking about since he declared hostilities and since he posted on Truth Social several times. He's encouraging the people to take their future in their own hands and rise up and take over the regime. And we're not seeing the wholesale massacre, right? Look, right now, if you are a true believer in the Iranian regime, you're too busy trying to save yourself or kill the Americans and Israelis. You're not too bothered by the people in the street. So this is the opportunity for the people to rise up and take over those institutions.
And are we seeing that? And do you think that will happen?
I think we're seeing the potential. We see the fact that people are out there on the streets as there's a war going on, as America and Israel are bombing Iran, tells you that they want regime change. That's why they're there. They're in danger by being out on the streets. And we know that, as you said, the regime has gunned down so many of them. But they're out there to send a message to America, to the West, that they want a regime change. Whether that will happen right now, I don't think it will. I think that the United States and Israel need to continue degrading the military capabilities of Iran, destroying the Basij, the morality police, these militias that have been killing the people. Once you take out that infrastructure, the people can rise up.
So yeah, let's continue with that. I mean, how do we move from taking over from people on the streets celebrating to taking over the insurance of the state?
Well, look, I think, first of all, I think we have to clarify that I do not think that there will be American or any other boots on the ground. This is for the Iranian people to do themselves. President Trump has made that clear. We're not going to go and secure the government and hand it over to anyone. This is not Iraq. This is not Afghanistan. This is a new ballgame. What people will do, I think that they will work with people within the regime, not the higher-ups, but people within the regime who see the need for change, who don't want the path that we're going down, one of destruction. So I think that you will see government agencies opening their doors, people coming into these government offices, much like we saw with the fall of the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe. There will be some who resist, there will be some blood that's shed, but largely I think you will see a transition period.
Okay, so beyond the U.S. and Israel bombing the regime, taking out its leadership, what can they do to help the people on the ground?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that in the West, we need to continue pressure on our governments not to let this be a one-off, not to just stop this campaign and let things go back to normal. So there needs to be messages sent to members of Congress who are opposing this action, to Western leaders who are still not on the fence and not committed to seeing this through. I think that public pressure is necessary to show that we stand with the Iranian people. But beyond that, there need to be plans. There needs to be a basis for the economy to rebuild, companies that are willing to come back in, even oil companies especially that have an interest in rebuilding Iran. Once you start to see that private sector mobilization, then you know that the people in Iran will have even more power to take back their country.
Okay, and just with the last 30 seconds or so, Gerard, say the Iranian people actually don't have the ability to take back their country. But yet the Iranian regime is decimated, their nuclear warheads, their missiles, their navy. Where does this go from there? I mean, is there some kind of off-ramp for President Trump?
I think President Trump has multiple off-ramps, and the one short of regime change is if the government, whatever form it takes, agrees to give up its nuclear program, agrees to decommission its ballistic missiles, agrees to stop funding terrorism, and more importantly, agrees to a mechanism for enforcement and verification.
All right, Gerard Filitti, we will continue our coverage of the joint U.S. Does this attack on Iran mean for China in terms of economy, military? We'll get into the full gambit.
Look, I think that the long story is, or the short part of the long story is that it's constraining China. This is part of what we've been seeing with President Trump in the last year. He's slowly constricting China's ability to operate in South America, in Europe, now the Middle East as well, whether it's strengthening the Abraham Accords or taking out the regime in Iran. So all this should be sending a message to China that America is starting to push back, and we're not yet sure where this will go.
And at the same time, China is decapitating its own military, hardening up in one sense, but at the same time thinning out their military leaderships. How do you think the regime in China is viewing this?
Well, look, first, I think that they're concerned when they know that the weapons that they sold Iran and Russia, for that matter, are no match for what the United States has to offer. So there should be a concern there, militarily speaking. But when you're when you're purging your staff of people who have experience, that is a danger. That's a risk to your ability to maintain your institutions, to maintain your defenses. So the only reason China seems to be doing it is because they are concerned that there is dissatisfaction within the ranks, and they want to have that loyalty test where only the most loyal to the regime will remain.
Now, one thing as I'm thinking about China and Russia and Iran, I mean, these three have sort of been buddy-buddy in recent years, performing as recently as just a few weeks ago, joint naval operations in the Strait of Hormuz, China and Russia forming historically large military operations, war games. But at the same time, they're not coming to Iran's aid here. Whereas if Iran or China was attacking, say, the UK, you can probably be sure the US would be there.
Absolutely. But this just shows you that these relationships were transactional. They were not deep-seated on a commonality of belief or ideology other than, America bad. What you see is transactional nature of their economic benefit, of their desire to hem in the West. It's not a deep partnership where they can rely on each other. Iran would just as soon see the godless Chinese eliminated as they would partner with them. And that works both ways. So you're not seeing anyone come to anyone's defense because they don't have the ideological alignment when it comes to how their societies are run and what they're based on.
As a side note, I always think about what would happen if the U.S. was gone. You'd have these diametrically opposed regimes who don't have any moral fundamental values going absolute slaughter at one another. But that's a whole other story. Now, China, you mentioned China's economy. Not exactly in great shape. What happens if they're cut off from Iranian oil?
I think in the short run, they will be paying more for oil on the open market. It's not that anyone's blocking China from accessing oil. They just want to get it at a discount. And if anything, this there will be some cost savings, if you will, because you're not facing sanctions from the United States, secondary sanctions for engaging in transactions with Iran once the regime changes in Iran. So there is a potential for economic benefit. But at the end of the day, China still needs oil. It needs to turn more to Russia. Venezuela is cut off now. So the question is, where do they get their oil? And it's not going to be Iran for any time soon.
Yeah, and that makes me think of another part of this. If China can't buy oil from Iran, they're buying it perhaps from Russia, right? And so that could bolster Russia's situation, or what do you think the impact of that would be?
I think net it would be the same. The biggest difference there is that you would need more infrastructure built between Russia and China, which would cost billions of dollars, and that would be a fragile infrastructure to build because long term, you're looking at more oil being produced even in the United States. So you're looking at long-term futures where oil prices will not make it sustainable or economically worthwhile to build those pipelines or to have more ships to transport oil. So it might be a stopgap measure, but in the immediate term, China will have this crisis of where it gets its oil from.
So what is the value of the Iranian regime and close ties between China and Iran to China?
Well, to China, it's an export market for weapons. It's an export market for ideology, meaning that it can parlay its relationship with Iran to develop businesses in that country, in other parts of the Middle East where Iran does have an influence. So that's an economic benefit for China more than anything else. But it's also a buffer. It's a testing ground for seeing how they can influence a local country. And with Iran, you did have this anti-Western hatred, which aligned well with China. But at the end of the day, China is very transactional. It doesn't care about Iran. It doesn't care about anyone but itself. So it will find whatever other partners it can around the world, if it's not foreclosed in doing that by the United States.
So you have potentially the Iranian regime falling. I mean, it's been significantly diminished. We have the Venezuelan regime falling. The Cuba is now facing significant reductions in its oil, basically a crisis. Russia is facing pushback against about its war in Ukraine. So all these different players aligned with China are taking a hit at this time under the Trump administration. So is there a shifting global balance of power happening?
I think we're seeing the new world order that was talked about back in the 1990s. We're seeing a reawakening of America as a global powerhouse, constraining what has been an economic war, and let's not mistake it, that's what it has been, waged by China against America and the West. So what we will see, we don't need tariffs to come back to parity or to develop our economy at the expense of China. We also have this curtailment of China's influence around the world, which steadily is what the Trump administration has been doing.
Okay, now one of the things here is that Iran is striking the Gulf states, these are Arab nations, and not just military targets. They're striking hotels, airports, resorts, these kind of places, oil infrastructure. So China, of course, has investments, expatriates in that area. So what does that mean for the relations between those states and China?
Well, it shows that you really can't count on your friends when you need to. I think that the relations with China are not going to change significantly from countries that China is involved with in the Middle East right now. Long term, sure. Long term, you're seeing the shift in balance. You're seeing a shift in the power structure. You're seeing less ideologically inclined moves towards Iran, towards Russia, towards China. But for now, those business interests, I mean, yeah, okay, you're losing assets, you're losing a little bit, but China's looking at the long term. So they're looking at maintaining those relationships no matter what price they're paying right now.
And what is that price?
They're business. They're losing business. They're losing ability to sail. If markets are closed, if you can't fly into those countries, you can't send ships to those countries, then you're losing business. And that affects the Chinese economy. It's still a net exporter, and it still needs those markets.
Now, one of the things that's concerning, say, the regime falls in Iran, but you still have a significant communications infrastructure built by the Chinese companies, Huawei, ZTE, that's still in place. And they can monitor whatever's happening. They're probably monitoring things very carefully right now.
Well, I'm sure that they are, but that's the point. I mean, once you have a regime change, you can change the infrastructure. You can find other companies to come in and bid to redo the system. We're moving away from 5G to 6G, 6G to 7G. All of this is technology that does not have to be Chinese. So when you're modernizing the infrastructure of Iran, and right now it's been relying on China because no one else will sell to it with sanctions, you're opening up the economy to America, to the West, to other countries that can come in and develop a China-free infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think that looks like? I mean, what does the post-regime Iran look like in terms of infrastructure, economy?
No, I think you will see, if we're truly free of the regime and there is a democracy, you will see it becoming a burgeoning market like other Gulf states, because you will no longer have U.S. sanctions or European sanctions. You will have an opening of the economy like nothing we've seen before. So all of a sudden, you will have wealth flooding in to build up the infrastructure, the country itself, everything from telecom and roads to hotels and businesses. So you will see an economic powerhouse grow, but it's not at the cost of anyone other than potentially China.
So all of this seems to lead back to focusing on China. With prosperity in the Middle East and alignment around perhaps United States values as opposed to Chinese interests or Iranian regime interests, what does it mean for China in the long term?
Long term, it puts more pressure on the economy, on their ability to regain their economic footing, which is not fantastic right now, despite what the propaganda is coming out of Beijing. And this is if anything, it does pose a little bit of a danger, because if China has its back to the wall and it's looking at an economy that's still slowing down and it's being excluded from global markets because of these changes, then what will it do to regain that? Will it use its military? Will it use other influence in order to get back what it thinks it lost? So there is a danger there.
And how does the Taiwan issue play into that?
Well, I think that's the big question. Well, first, I have to say that with President Trump, I think there's more clarity on where the United States stands. It's not sending mixed messages to an American ally. Taiwan is an American ally. But I think ultimately that pressure has been growing by China in the last few years. And there is a concern as they're building up, as the communist government is building up its infrastructure, there is a concern now about America having the materiel that we're using, missiles, rockets, ships, everything that's in the Middle East. We need to have the ability to also step in if Taiwan is attacked.
All right, Gerard Filitti, we'll come back and continue our coverage of the joint U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran, what could become a regional war or to end the Iranian regime right after the break. The political fallout in the U.S. of these attacks on Iran. But during the commercial break, or one of the packages we listened to just now, you mentioned that the missiles being launched from Iran into Israel are getting through at a higher rate than they were last night.
They certainly seem to be. I've been getting reports from Israel in the last half hour or so of some impacts, a lot of injuries, definitely more than the first night of hostilities. So the exact numbers and figures remain to be seen, but there are more missiles that seem to be getting through, including cluster munitions, which a warhead that separates into multiple weapons. So this certainly seems to be an intensification on the part of Iran.
And what kind of sensory experience are you seeing on maybe X or colleagues of yours?
Well, a lot of people are still sleeping in bomb shelters. There's a lot of, it creates a lot of anxiety when you're living in a country that is being shot at all the time. But unfortunately, this has been the Israeli experience for years now. This is not exactly new, but hopefully it's the beginning of the end.
Yeah. So comparing to last night, I mean, we were talking significant escalation. Is it a 5% and 80%? Because Iran did say last night that they would strike harder than ever before.
Well, it's hard to gauge, and again, this has just been the beginning of the night in Israel, but certainly by this time tonight compared to last night, there are considerably more missiles that have been launched, and not all have been intercepted.
Sure. Got it, yes. Okay, so continuing our conversation about the political fallout of these strikes on Iran in the U.S., what is your view of that? How do you see this playing out? Because right now the focus is on the strikes on Iran, the planes, the missiles, but there's, of course, the fraught U.S. political landscape.
And we will be seeing a lot of that play out this week in Congress, where we expect that Democrats, with some Republicans, will be putting forward a resolution on the War Powers Act to try to limit what President Trump is doing. I think that in America right now, there is a lot of division on these attacks. I think Reuters reported today that a quarter, even among Republicans, don't support these attacks. But again, these are early days yet. We haven't had a full briefing from President Trump addressing the nation, which may well see in the next few days. But right now, there is that divisiveness. Politics will get in the way, and even within MAGA, there is a division of whether this is warranted or not.
Now, let's stay with the War Powers Resolution. What does it say exactly? Is it necessary?
Well, it says that within 48 hours of commencement of hostilities, a term that's not clearly defined, the president must provide a report to Congress about what he is doing or she is doing, the justification and the expected outcome, how things will play out. Now, arguably, President Trump did brief most of the Gang of Eight before hostilities started, so that might qualify as the briefing. But Congress has to either approve this military action with a resolution or disapprove it. After 60 days, President Trump would need to start withdrawing forces if he does not get congressional approval.
And I want to look at this. I mean, President Trump gave us this 8-minute press release, basically a video, the night of the strikes, but he hasn't come out publicly. There has been no press conference with him, major statements published by the president. So what do you think that is? I mean, we were expected to see something yesterday, at least.
Well, I think that what we're seeing is this is what happens when you start hostilities. The president is more focused on what's going on in the skies and on the ground of Iran, and not to have many talks with the American people, although he has been briefing reporters. He's had plenty of conversations with press today. I think that we can expect is President Trump will lay out a grander message, as he did during the State of the Union, actually introducing people who are affected by this and laying out the case for why this is necessary. I think that if he does that, more Americans will start to come around to what this is and why it's necessary.
So at what point would he need Congress to justify these attacks?
Well, he both does and doesn't. There's always an inherent tension under the president's Article 2 authorities as the head of the armed forces, commander-in-chief, and Article 1 powers that Congress has to actually declare war. Now, we haven't actually declared war in decades, but we've had the president of the United States of both parties use forces overseas. So that really is the issue, is whether this is something that Congress supports or not. Ironically, even if Congress votes on a resolution to condemn or to try to limit this action, President Trump can veto it. And if Congress doesn't have 2/3 of both houses, then that will not pass, and President Trump will de facto remain able to wage war against Iran.
Now, it's not just Congress Trump has to appease. Of course, the American people, he needs their support. So, foreign policy isn't as important for the American people, let's say, the economy, what's in their wallets. So how do you think this will play out politically for him? I mean, we are in a midterm year.
Well, we are in a midterm year, and we have to be mindful that even within the Republican Party, some in the MAGA front are condemning this action. They're saying that this is not America first.
And strongly.
That's very strongly so. We have Representative Massey, who is joining forces with the Democrats for a vote on Trump's powers. We have even Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was a staunch Trump ally, now condemning this vocally, joining people like Mayor Mamdani in New York City, or even Kamala Harris across the aisle. So what this shows is that the president needs to do a better job explaining to the American people why this is important to us, that this really is America first, that this saves us money that we've been paying towards endless wars because we're finally bringing it to an end, that we are likely to have economic benefits that will trickle down or that will directly impact Americans as a result of this. And I think he can make that argument, and I think he will.
And expand on that. What else do you think he'll say?
Well, I think he'll also speak to the need and the tradition for America supporting democracy. That when you're seeing people being massacred in the streets simply for wanting to express their rights, to exercise their basic human rights, when you're seeing those people massacred, that this is what America was founded on being able to support people who seek freedom. So I think he will play the strong card of America's allegiance to democratic ideals, while at the same time focusing on why this is tangibly good for America.
America, the golden house on the hill, defender of freedom.
Well, look, if it hadn't been for Jimmy Carter in 1979, we wouldn't be here today. We had Iran as an ally back then. The Shah of Iran was a strong ally, a friend in the Middle East. It was a stabilizing factor. But by accepting the Ayatollah Khomeini come in, that destabilized the region for decades. So really, that was a mistake that we need to correct, because all the damage that's been happening in the Middle East since then is because we screwed up in 1979. So we need to make that right, both for the rest of the world, but for ourselves as well.
Gerard, one of the things that could happen here is if these attacks go on longer than days, the days or weeks that we were promised, it goes into months. I mean, you saw what happened in Ukraine, that wasn't a weeks long. Not that I exactly want to compare the U.S. and Israel to Russia, but, that could affect the U.S. stock market, that could affect gas prices, and of course, with the elections coming up.
Oh, it absolutely can. We're already seeing oil ticking up to close to $80 a barrel, I think, today in off-market trading. We're seeing that this does have an effect. But ultimately, the economy is an issue of confidence. So if President Trump can explain how this benefits us, and it's not impacting us, we have sources of oil that will remain unaffected by this. Our economy is strong regardless of what happens in Iran. If he explains this to the American people, I think he maintains that political support. But at the end of the day, it's also a vision of where we see America. If we see us having a strong position in the world because we want to be benefiting from the global economy, or we want to relinquish control and just be internalized, I think that's an important discussion that will be taking place this summer with the midterms.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't exactly done the best job of convincing voters that the economy is strong, that their pockets are fatter than they think.
Well, the biggest reason for that is under Biden, we saw close to double-digit inflation. And even though now inflation is back to where it should be, we don't have deflation. So we're still paying on average 20% more than we were 5 years ago for goods. And Americans feel that. We're not seeing prices come down to the level that they were. So for average Americans, they just still see the prices higher, even though they're not going even higher, which is a good thing.
Now, we saw Marco Rubio come out in Munich, make a case for the U.S. foreign policy. It was almost like a good cop moment, where you might say Trump is the bad cop. He's tough, right? He's got an edge to him. Rubio has an eloquence and, a sort of a different flavor, you could say. Are there any of Trump's allies that you think could better make the case for these strikes on Iran than Trump?
I think a lot of them can make the argument just as well as he can. Look, ultimately, Rubio is a diplomat. He's the chief diplomat of the United States. So what you will hear him say in Munich and elsewhere is very diplomatic by definition. What we're seeing President Trump, his style is direct. His style is confrontational when necessary. He says it like it is. So you see that different style. And I think that he will use both styles to explain to the American people why this is important. He will have proxies like Marco Rubio. I think even Pete Hegseth is speaking about this as well. Expect to see J.D. Vance come more on board with this, even though he's been mostly excluded from this and he's been focusing on fraud issues, especially in Minnesota. But I think you will see his surrogates doing a lot of talking while Trump can deliver the hard reality of why this is necessary.
All right, Gerard Filitti, you've been incredible helping us carry this coverage of Iran through the evening, through the afternoon. I know we have one more segment coming up in the rest of this hour. For now, President Trump has just made a new statement on Iran.